Howdy, howdy. So, a couple of days ago, I made a video about what if all Rudyard Lynch's predictions of civil conflict in the United States, regardless of who won the election, and now that Donald Trump has won the election, how the possibilities of how that's going to play out. And I set forth two scenarios which could possibly happen either independently or simultaneously. I'm still of the opinion it might happen simultaneously. But it looks like one is definitely on track to happen now. I set forth the model that it's possible that in order for Donald Trump to affect the changes that need to happen within the political structure that everybody knows needs to happen, that he may have to become a version of Augusto Pinochet. I told you why. Well, Mr. Lynch, I said that you were 80% right. Now I'm going to up that to 90%. And here's why. Already, the governors of New Mexico, California, New York, Michigan, Colorado, specifically, Oregon, Washington. Yes, there are a lot of illegal immigrants in Washington State. Minnesota, Tampon Tim. Possibly Michigan. Although I don't think Whitmer's going to be that stupid. Are now coming out, and the attorney generals of some of those states are also coming out saying that certain policies that the Trump administration is discussing, that they will use their National Guard or their law enforcement or by policy to either not cooperate or to block actions or block federal agencies that have been directed by the new commander-in-chief, being Donald J. Trump, on certain issues, one of them being immigration. So, the stages are already being set. Now, some people might argue, well, what about nullification? What about states' rights? States have rights when it comes to nullifying the federal government should the federal government decide to do something that is unconstitutional in regards to the citizens of that state, or in regards to directing policy of that state. So say, for example, the federal government, for some reason or another, wanted to remove white men's right to vote. And certain states would stand up and say, well, we're not going to do that because it's protected in the Constitution. Then the states have the power to do something about that under the 10th Amendment. Okay? But when it comes to enforcement of constitutional law, and the federal government seeks to enforce said constitutional law, and the state fails to comply, or the governors of those states fail to comply, and they either tacitly or actively resist, then that sets up possibility for the federal government to act forcefully against that state. So let's say that the governor of California, if Donald Trump were to figure out a way to mass deport illegal aliens or illegal migrants, the governor of California would move to call up the National Guard or use the state police to block or arrest federal agents or actors of the federal government in order to enforce immigration law and deport illegal migrants within the state of California, or to prevent federal agencies by constitutional law to enforce federal border policy along California's portion of the border. Then, because the state of California is acting extra constitutionally, what could happen is the state of California, their state government could be suspended, and there is a precedent for this. It's called the Reconstruction period. Could be suspended, meaning that the legislature would be disbanded, the governor would be unseated, and the military governor would be put in place, and California would be relegated back to the status of a territory until actors within that state were removed and or prosecuted. And then that state would be set on the process of regaining statehood. That's one. Okay? That's dealing with the states. And if that state chose to resist, then obviously we would go into Pinochet mode and shots would be fired. The other thing is there's rumors that there are actors within the Department of Defense and other federal agencies who, once the commander-in-chief is installed, that if he were to issue a constitutional order, or if Congress were to pass a constitutional law, or if he were to enforce a constitutional law, that they would resist in enforcing it or enacting it and encourage the members of their agency to defy. Once again, a Pinochet type situation would be set up. So say, for example, the Joint Chiefs of Staff decides that he's not going to carry out the commands of the United States President. At which point, the United States President would be forced to hire a mercenary group, such as BlackRock, or sequester from states that he knows he can depend on, such as Texas or Alabama, or Kansas or Oklahoma, their National Guard, and militarily go in there and remove that chain of command and use those elements to fill those positions until those positions could be filled correctly. And if those people were to command resistance, then shots would be fired. So it does look like the Pinochet model is going to work out somehow, some way. I just gave you a couple scenarios of how that might happen. The other thing that could happen is people like Letitia James. She's already been warned, back off. And the people that surround her, that could unfold into a melee of some sort. may have to relegate the state of New Mexico back to being a militarily governed territory. Maybe even the state of Colorado. Same thing as California. And may have to use force to enact that. So say, for example, now he's got the Pentagon working against him, and he had to nationalize the National Guards of red states in order to take over the Pentagon and get him a force that he knows he could depend on to enact what he needs to enact. He could then also use those nationalized National Guards to stand against rebellious states. Now we are actually getting into possibly uniform force against uniform force, but it would be dispersed. So it could be, the section in the middle versus the two Rocky Mountain states in the middle, possibly Arizona too. It depends on how stupid that governor wants to get, which would be 3 Rocky Mountain states in the middle, and the West Coast, and everybody in the middle turned against them. If that were the case, something that y'all don't know, there are actually alternate capital cities in the United States. Just in case the federal government had to relocate in a situation such as a nuclear conflict or a situation like what we might be facing. Now, the alternate capital cities of the United States, at least back in the 1950s, were Santa Fe, New Mexico, Austin, Texas, Sacramento, California, Denver, Colorado, St. Louis, Missouri. I think it was St. Louis. Nashville, Tennessee, I think was one of them. And Topeka, Kansas. So we would have to remove 3 of those, which would be Santa Fe, Denver, and Sacramento. So chances are, most likely, the conflict capital would be relocated to Austin, or one of the other cities in the middle of the country that would serve as the alternate. Y'all didn't know that, did you? It's actually part of the continuity of government plan. So, yeah, we could be looking at a Pinochet type situation with the Franco-style Civil War. Pieces are starting to move into place. So now, Mr. Lynch, I say that you are 90% correct. I still think that now that has become likely, I still think now that vigilante type, unsanctioned guerrilla type conflict could also occur amongst the populace at large, beginning in isolated areas. So, Mr. Lynch, my hat is off to you. Your research, but stay tuned. It might actually get very interesting. Very interesting. And with that, y'all have a blessed day.